Think about the last time someone asked you for a favor. You were tired. You had your own problems. Your plate was already full, and somewhere inside you, every part of you wanted to say, "I'm sorry, not this time." But you didn't. You smiled. You said yes. You showed up. And then, late at night, when the world went quiet, you lay there, staring at the ceiling, with a strange, hollow feeling in your chest that you couldn't quite name. Not anger, not sadness exactly, just exhaustion. A bone-deep, soul-level exhaustion that no amount of sleep ever seems to fix. If that feeling is familiar to you, then stay here, because this video is about you. Not the version of you that the world sees, the dependable one, the selfless one, the one who always comes through. This is about the version of you that no one ever asks about, the one who is quietly disappearing behind every yes you never meant to give. Here's the paradox that lives at the center of your life. The very thing that made people love you is the same thing that is slowly destroying you. Your inability to say no, it didn't come from generosity. It came from fear. A very old, very deep fear that if you said no, you would lose something far more precious than your time. You would lose love. You would lose safety. You would lose your place in the lives of the people who mattered most to you. And so you learned, if I make myself useful enough, needed enough, agreeable enough, then maybe, just maybe, I'll be okay. That belief saved you once, but it is costing you everything now. In psychology, what you're experiencing has a name. It's called the Fawn Response. You've likely heard of fight, flight, and freeze, the three survival responses the nervous system activates when it perceives danger. But there is a fourth response, one that rarely gets talked about: fawn. The fawn response is what happens when a person learns, very early in life, that the safest way to survive is to become whatever the other person needs them to be. To agree, to accommodate, to anticipate, to please. Not because they want to, but because their nervous system decided at some point in childhood that this was the only strategy that kept them out of harm. And here is where it begins. The clinical term for what shaped this response is emotional neglect. Psychologist Dr. Janice Webb defines it this way: emotional neglect is not what happened to you. It is what failed to happen. It is the parent who never asked, "How are you feeling?" The home where achievement was celebrated but vulnerability was ignored. The childhood where you learned to be strong, because falling apart was not an option anyone around you could handle. You were never told your emotions were wrong. They were simply never acknowledged. And a child who grows up without emotional validation learns one devastating lesson: my inner world does not matter. So they bury it. They put on the face the world needs to see, and they get very, very good at taking care of everyone else, because taking care of themselves was never modeled, never encouraged, never made to feel safe. For many of these individuals, this is deepened by a pattern known as parentification. Parentification occurs when a child is made responsible, consciously or unconsciously, for the emotional well-being of a parent. Perhaps you were the one your mother vented to. Perhaps you could always sense when your father's mood shifted, and you adjusted yourself accordingly, quietly, without being asked. Perhaps you were the peacemaker, the responsible one, the one who held it together so everyone else could fall apart. You were a child performing the emotional labor of an adult, and in doing so, you learned that your needs, your rest, your desires, your no, were a luxury no one could afford. This constant state of emotional vigilance rewired your nervous system into a state called hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is not just being anxious. It is your nervous system running a continuous background program, scanning every room you enter, reading every face, measuring every silence, anticipating every need, before anyone has to ask. You walk into a conversation, and before a single word is spoken, you already know what the other person wants from you, and you begin preparing to give it. This is not a gift. This is a trauma response that never got the signal that the war was over. And finally, These patterns crystallize in adulthood into what attachment theory calls anxious or avoidant attachment. Those with anxious attachment say yes out of fear. If I don't give them what they need, they'll leave. Those with avoidant attachment say yes out of numbness. They've disconnected so deeply from their own needs that they don't even register the cost of giving. In both cases, the result is the same. A person who has forgotten, or perhaps never learned, that they are allowed to take up space. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist persists. What you deny in yourself will rule you from the inside." Every time you swallowed a no, every boundary you dissolved, every need you dismissed as too much, it didn't disappear. It went underground. It became resentment you can't explain, a quiet irritability that surfaces in strange moments, an emotional distance you keep from people even when you love them deeply. A part of you, the part that never got to be honest, never got to be tired, never got to say, "Not today," is still in there, waiting, exhausted from waiting. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, wrote, "Dum defertur vita transcurrit." While we are postponing, life passes. You have been postponing yourself for a very long time, postponing your rest, postponing your desires, postponing the life that could be yours, if only you could stop managing everyone else's. And Rainer Maria Rilke once asked, in his quiet and devastating way, "But what if what you call your tenderness is actually your terror dressed in giving clothes? What if your generosity is not who you are? What if it is what you became in order to survive?" The invisible grief of the person who never says no is this: they have never been witnessed. They have been needed. They have been depended upon. They have been called an angel, so reliable, the best friend I've ever had. But they have never been known. Because to be known, you have to be seen, including in your limits, your struggles, your refusals, and they were never allowed to have those. Let's talk about who you become, when yes is the only word you were ever safe to speak. In relationships, you might find yourself attracted to people who take, not because you're weak, but because people who take feel familiar. They mirror the dynamic you grew up in. You give, they receive. And somewhere in that equation, your nervous system recognizes home, even when home was never actually safe. In your career, you become the person everyone relies on, the one who stays late, the one who picks up the slack, the one who says, "It's fine, I'll handle it." You are often the most capable person in the room, and the least compensated. Not because you're not valued, but because you never learned to negotiate, to push back, to say, "This is what I require." In your self-worth, you might measure your value in what you do, not in who you are. On days when you have nothing to offer, when you are sick or depleted or simply human, you feel useless. This is the wound speaking. The belief, planted long ago, I am only as valuable as what I can provide. In your boundaries, you might not have them. Or, more precisely, you have them, but you've learned to apologize for them. You over-explain. You justify. You feel guilty for days after finally saying no once. That guilt? It is not your conscience. It is your conditioning. In emotional regulation, you might struggle to identify what you actually feel in the moment it's happening. This is called alexithymia, difficulty in identifying and describing your own emotions. It is common in those raised in emotionally dismissive environments. You became so skilled at reading others' emotions that you lost fluency in your own. In your identity, perhaps the most painful symptom of all, you don't know what you want. Not really. Because for so long, what you wanted was irrelevant. The question was always, what do they need? Never, what do I need? And so now, when someone asks you, what do you want? There is a silence that frightens you. Not because you have no desires, but because wanting things still feels dangerous somehow, like it might cost you love. But here is the most important thing I need you to hear right now. These are not character flaws. They are not proof that you are broken or weak or permanently damaged. They are proof that you were adaptive, incredibly, impressively adaptive. You found a way to survive in an environment that wasn't built for your wholeness. That is not a tragedy. That is resilience. But resilience that has outlived its purpose becomes a prison. And you deserve more than survival. So where do you go from here? Healing for someone like you does not begin with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It begins with something much smaller and much harder. It begins with permission. Permission to be inconvenient. Permission to be unavailable. Permission to be a person with limits and edges and needs. The first practice is inner child work. Somewhere inside you is the child who first learned that no was dangerous. That child needs to hear, perhaps for the first time, that their needs are not a burden, that they were always allowed to rest, that love, real love, does not require them to earn it. You can begin simply. When you feel the urge to say yes, pause. Place your hand on your chest and ask quietly, is this a yes from my heart or a yes from my fear? The second is shadow work. In the Jungian tradition, the shadow is the part of ourselves we've been conditioned to deny. Your no lives in your shadow. Your anger lives there. Your needs live there. Your desire for rest and softness and self-priority, all of it, waiting in the dark. Reclaiming these parts of yourself is not selfishness. It is integration. It is the work of becoming whole. The third is nervous system regulation. Because this is not just psychological, it is physiological. Your body has been running on high alert for years, perhaps decades. Simple, consistent practices, slow diaphragmatic breathing, cold water on the face, grounding your feet to the floor. These are not trivial. They signal to your nervous system, you are safe now. You do not have to earn your place here. You are allowed to rest. And the fourth, perhaps the most radical of all, practice receiving. Let someone help you, without deflecting, without immediately reciprocating, without saying, oh, you didn't have to. Just receive. Sit in the discomfort of being cared for. Because if you cannot receive care, then you are not in relationships. You are in transactions. And you deserve so much more than a transaction. I want to leave you with one final thought. Psychologist Brené Brown once wrote, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. You have spent a lifetime afraid to disappoint. What if, starting today, you became just slightly more afraid of disappointing yourself? Your no is not cruelty. It is clarity. Your limits are not weakness. They are wisdom. Your needs are not too much. They are human. And you, with all your exhaustion, all your invisible grief, all your quietly carried weight, you are not broken. You are someone in the process of learning, perhaps for the very first time, what it feels like to be whole. The goal is not to be fixed, but to become whole. If this video found you at the right moment, if something here felt like a mirror reflecting something you've never been able to name, then please share it. Not for the algorithm, but because somewhere there is someone just like you, lying awake tonight, staring at the ceiling, carrying a no they've never been allowed to say. They need to hear this too. Subscribe if you want to go deeper. Every video on this channel is built for people who are ready to understand themselves at a level that actually changes things. I'll see you in the next one.